The two broad groups are those who are members of superannuation funds and really don't give it a moment's thought beyond, when they get the annual statement or the 6 monthly statement in the post, they have a look at it and they say, yeah, that looks fine. Then you've got another group who have got all of their other financial commitments out of the way and approaching retirement, and all of a sudden superannuation becomes this thing that's sort of hanging over their heads, and they've got to put more in, they've got to ramp it up so that they can afford to retire in comfort.
The key challenge is engagement. That single word, engagement. How do you engage your membership? So even though we've got all this default on membership, default on investment options, default on insurance options, I mean, these funds build these wonderful flexible arrangements that no one takes advantage of because they're not engaged.
In many senses, I think we are the lucky country, and of course because we're at a superannuation conference, I'd have to say that the superannuation system we've got in Australia makes us the lucky country. For a long time we wanted members to become engaged with their superannuation. Well, as a result of the Simply Super in 1st of July 2007, boy are they engaged. Ask anybody running a call centre or watch the paper flow going backwards and forwards to superannuation funds. Members are now engaged.
For many people, superannuation is simply a good method of saving which is being done effectively by remote control by somebody else, and many people, despite all the talk about choice and directing your investment, many people are quite happy to sit back and let somebody else do that, as long as they're prepared to take that relatively passive approach towards their superannuation. I think it'll work.
Once they brought in that the money put in and claim back on your tax that's when we started, which was only in the early 90s, mid 90s that we started. So we've got nowhere near enough super to retire at the moment. As you said, probably the farms are a bit of a superannuation thing for us.
But for many it's like that movie, Sunday Too Far Away. It's just so far away, they don't care.
I just love listening to Don Stammer, who always says, I would just want you to teach your children one thing, the power of compound interest. And after you've taught them that, teach them the power of compound interest again.
My sort of generation, I think you find those sorts of people understand just what it can do for them in retirement if they do the right sort of things with their super and what sort of a difference it can make to them. And exactly right, it used to be a conversation stopper. As soon as I told people that I worked in superannuation, end of conversation, let's move on to the next topic.
Our generation seems to want everything now. They, they're not really looking forward to, 40 years down the track when they're going to have to depend on this money.
Increasingly, I don't know whether it's a sign of my age group, but I go to dinner parties and people are talking more about superannuation than they were 2 or 3 years ago.
Hopefully I can save a little bit of money here and there through my life before I retire, but not just on the superannuation, no, won't happen.
I think people don't really know about it. One of the fascinating things that I've really learnt, or that's been brought to my attention, is that superannuation can be people's biggest investment in their life. Not all people's, but some, but yet it could be the one that they pay the littlest attention to or spend the littlest of time on it, or just don't know.
Superannuation is the brilliance of economic policy, because it means that it gives you that support base in which in retirement you can choose to do whatever you want.
I knew it was something that I couldn't touch till retirement, so in the back of my mind, don't need to worry about it.
It's a means of securing your future, also taking a bit of responsibility from the government as far as looking after people in their retirement ages.
I think though you talk to most people at super funds, and the most common request they get through their call centre is still, how do I get it out?
Mid-40-ish will say inadequate. Members under mid-40-ish say mythical. And they all say it's too hard.
For years we've been trying to get people to at least have an opinion about superannuation. And this year, not only do people know what we're talking about, but from what we've just heard, there's some room for optimism. However, we still have a long way to go. Getting the baby boomers to recognise the need to keep saving and investing is more of a challenge, and there's more on that topic later in the conference program. Right now we have the opportunity to compare the thoughts on video with the results of our AIST research.
Well, superannuation, many of us in this room think it's great. We think it's the best social policy developed over the past 20 years. A retirement policies revolution. But what about the rest of the population? What do they think? Last year, as AIST was developing its policy platform and position on adequacy and a number of other issues, we decided to take a step back from the industry view of superannuation and find out exactly what the rest of Australia thought. So we commissioned IPSOS to undertake an Australia-wide mind and mood study, and it's the first ever done on the question of superannuation. And the research is quite detailed, so we won't be getting through all of the material today, but what we will do is focus on the mood of the nation when it comes to super. And at yesterday's afternoon session, Hugh Mackay talked about the re-engagement of the Australian society. And hopefully I'm thinking this might eventually translate into engagement in super, because we certainly need it. But I'll let Nicole talk to you and take you through all the details of the research project. Just by way of introduction, Nicole Torkar is the Executive Director, Marketing Services for IPSOS Australia. Nicole is a specialist in consumer anthropology, consumer marketing, marketing research and business information. Nicole commenced her career specialising in qualitative research methods and applications development whilst earning a Master's in Statistics. And prior to joining IPSOS, Nicole served as the Australian Executive Director at Nielsen's. So please welcome Nicole.
Morning, thanks Fiona. Just want to start by introducing what we did in this study and then getting into the detail about how Australians are thinking and feeling in relation to superannuation. We were privileged to pull up a chair in true Hugh Mackay style and listen to 14 gatherings of friends, workmates and colleagues. Neighbours chat uninterruptedly about what was on their mind in relation to superannuation. What were their motivations, what were their aspirations and what were their concerns. We also held 18 in-depth interviews with Australians in more detail about their particular feelings around super. We then quantified these feelings in a survey of 2,000 people. All of the findings from this study are drawn from Middle Australia, so upper middle to lower middle socio-economic strata, covering men and women aged from 18 to their mid-70s. All major capital cities were included, as were a variety of fund types, work sectors and personal circumstances. As the title of this presentation suggests, there are many myths, there are many misconceptions and there are some mistrusts relating to superannuation in the community. As I present these results, I won't be saying whether I think they're true, false or indifferent. I'm presenting what Australians are thinking and feeling. It is now time for you to sit and read a sprinkling of their comments as I present to you the mind and mood of the Australian population. So please listen and contemplate these opportunities and challenges that these findings represent for you. With the introduction of compulsory superannuation in the past 15 years, Australians now have the benefit of retirement savings, and the majority of Australians actually view the concept of compulsory superannuation as sound and well-intentioned. And overwhelmingly, the majority that we surveyed were happy with the way their funds were performing. However, compared to the actual value of their home or their knowledge of what the value of residential property is, the amount in their fund was not perceived to be actually so super. As one man commented, "My house is worth 560 grand. I'm lucky to have 80k in my super fund." The dominant financial goal for many of those in this study was centred on housing. So either getting into the market, trying to pay their actual mortgage, or purchasing an investment property. With strong returns on property across Australia in recent years, many considered bricks and mortar as a sound investment over many others. The majority actually believed that superannuation was a better investment than paying off their mortgage. When we surveyed this, it was at 14% of the population. For many under 40, really weighed down with the demands of mortgages and families, They often expressed a real sense of frustration that they're unable to access their super money now. You saw in the video, someone was commenting that a number of calls they get at the call centre is, how can I get my money? Much of this for the under 40s is really driven by a belief that their money is worth more to them now than what it would be at 65. When asked how confident are you that you will have enough superannuation to live on when you retire, 28% were very or fairly confident. 53%, so just over half, were not confident at all that they would have enough money to live on in retirement. And it's worrying. It's worrying Middle Australia. Over half of those surveyed said they worry about not having enough money. So they recognise that the amount they have is not enough to live on. Many are extremely indignant that superannuation should not attract fees, particularly when there are minimal funds held in an account and when they take extended leave from work, particularly if it's for parenting or sick leave, they don't feel that fees should apply. Super is marketed as a key financial security, thereby instilling a strong perception that it should come with some sort of guarantee, a guarantee about returns across how their fund will perform. While many recognise that they have had good returns on their superannuation in recent years, a jungle of financial advice and advisors in the marketplace has given rise to widespread insecurity just over how safe is an individual superannuation now and, importantly, in the future. Compounded by continued commentary about the volatility of the global economy, witnessed daily on their nightly news. 30% reported they were worried that their fund could go broke and worried that they would lose their entire retirement nest egg. Australians reported feeling uncertain as to the government policy and the capability of any government of the day to actually change legislation to the detriment of their superannuation. This disquiet extends to an uncertainty of what governments might do at the time when they are actually retiring. The government will probably change the tax rules by the time I retire, and I will lose a lot of my superannuation in tax. 48% agreed, 19% were unsure. There's also uncertainty around the lump sum rules applying when they actually retire. Only 12% of those surveyed were confident that the lump sum rules would actually apply when it was their turn to retire. For many, their attitudes and behaviours are underpinned with the recognition that they actually know little about what's involved in their own superannuation and feeling disengaged with it because they also have quite a lack of knowledge and they find it too complex. When asked how much do you feel you know about your superannuation, 79% reported knowing a little or not very much at all. In a world that is awash with information, respondents made it clear that only that which is relevant to them will be absorbed. Few, 1 in 4 surveyed, said they did understand the jargon of superannuation. Many did not understand it. This lack of understanding makes them often suspicious of superannuation funds because of the complexities of the information that they're receiving, that constantly, always, to them looks the same. 1 in 5 reported having no idea how much super they actually even had. Younger generations should be well on their way to a secure retirement, given the compulsory deductions into super from their first pay packet. Despite this, we're now in a time of increased casualisation in the workforce. Many young people reported having multiple funds through casual employment, but recognised, whilst they should roll it over, it was either too hard or they felt the amounts were too insignificant to bother. While superannuation is not intended to be gender specific, many women continue to rely on their partner's earnings and decisions when it comes to their own retirement planning. Often this is driven by the transition to childbearing duties. reducing the household to a single income for an extended period of time. And the claim that there just won't be enough money to get by day to day, week to week, let alone trying to think of setting themselves up and saving for the future. Bubbling under this surface for many women is the recognition that should they separate or divorce, their financial position would be of real concern in the immediate and in the long term. But is it my money? People often remark, talking about the 9% contribution, in ways that showed complete disconnection with that money. 1 in 4 don't think of superannuation as being really their money anyway, as it's not discussed in the workplace generally except in the HR environment. So it wasn't a topic that was generally discussed amongst their friends or their neighbours, occasionally their work colleagues. In relation to how they are selecting funds, 66% of them just went with the employer one, and 13% of them carried it over from the old. So in terms of who's actually searching out, deciding what is the best fund, and there's multiple definitions across consumers of what that might be, 7% of those surveyed actually went out and researched funds. Otherwise, they just went with the employer one. Ironically, well, it is very apparent that the findings from this study, many people shy away from dealing with their own superannuation or actually feeling involved in it. There was quite a few who commented about trying to chase super up or making sure that their superannuation had been paid. Particularly if they're denied what they feel is rightfully theirs, whilst they will chase it, albeit later rather than sooner. The ability for employees to avoid making the 9% compulsory contribution is very real for some employees. During the course of this study, participants often felt able to voice their questions, and when particular members might have had some more knowledge than others due to either their education or their workplace experience, they were tagged as experts by their friends, neighbours or workmates. This, however, also exposed some of the misinformation and myths that sit around the benefits, choices and legislation pertaining to superannuation. Aware of their platform of opportunity among their peers, the unqualified among the participants suggested, "I had my accountant out and he said to me in the near future it's all about to change. So use your super to buy an investment property." One of the other nominated group experts commented, "The supposed industry experts reckon you are better off putting more into your mortgage now than into your super at the moment." The other one that was prevailing was, "Every dollar you put in, the government will match." In search of this trusted relationship, when individual financial decision making is not easy for many, a trusted relationship is sought, and superannuation is no exception to this. No surprises in finding that the priorities of different age groups and generations were diametrically opposed. However, the passage of life and generational attitudes historically follow many patterns of similarities. With the common hurdles of possible illness, reaching middle age and getting financial affairs in order, easily ignored and overlooked until absolutely necessary. It appears that the portrayal of superannuation language and timing is often interpreted as unrealistic, particularly in time. God, that's so far away, I can't even imagine getting there. They talk about 20 years, when their horizons are 1, 2 and 5 years. Also, it is that there's very little that is communicated to them around people actually living a good life in retirement, so very few actual examples. Much of this language of the never never really manifests itself in a continued unresponsive by individuals for retirement planning. It's just so far away, I'll think about it tomorrow. One of the primary financial responsibilities of an adult life is the need for allocation of money into insurances. Car, house, personal health. I'm sure everyone in this auditorium has multiple insurances. With the creation of family, life insurance and income protection insurance are often added to the list of necessaries. With superannuation, well, it aims to ensure, for one, when you are no longer working, it is not a term or a concept that many Australians are associated with. For many baby boomers, their memory of the term life insurance and not positive memories around insurance remains fresh, often sold to their parents as an assurance of money that would come of age when they turned 21, or that would pay for a parent's funeral rather than leaving them to bear the cost. In some ways, this has been quite a deterrent to the notion of insurance as something that will gain in value as an investment, with their experience showing that most of the years of contribution were absorbed by agent fees. While younger generations are clearly recognise that superannuation is a valid concept and construct, they see their window of opportunity is panoramic as opposed to a porthole. Multiple jobs, travel, paying off their HECS debt, a career that suits them, and getting into the housing market are their main concerns. For those in their late 20s through to 35 years, while financial demands are multiple and pressing, the need for distractions from that daily grind of life, work, relationships and families, instrumental in their prioritisation for other pleasures. As one commented, "I reckon when you are 55 you'll be thinking super's a good idea, but at the moment..." A lack of time and of disposable income is constantly cited as the reasons for not sorting and prioritising financial planning. Although this is often preceded with an acknowledgement, that's no excuse. The complexities, demands and aspirations of living, learning and work absorb everyday life, leaving little room for future planning of any sort, and for many it's quite simply just not on the radar. But time catches up. When we surveyed Australians, just under half felt that they don't have enough time left now to build up enough in their super fund to actually retire on. Ill health is the time bomb few prepare for. And for those in the critical age group of 50 to 60, any disruption to a working pattern and the ability to allocate money to their superannuation fund and future planning takes on much bigger significance. But this isn't recognised until they're actually ill. With unprecedented levels, and I'm sure Hugh would have spoken about this yesterday, of household debt in Australia, fewer people live by the maximum save for a rainy day. Fuelled by the cost of living, the property market, increased consumerism and the availability of credit. Debt is just a part of contemporary life. One of the comments that was prevalent in the qualitative phase was, "We're all just in the same boat." Australians are tending to find someone else to shame or blame when it comes to their financial decision making and their lot in life. Either baby boomers blaming the youth of today or vice versa, or middle Australia blaming the wealthy. Of equal impact is the elusive monetary figure actually needed to retire and survive. While younger people are often singled out by older generations as actually not savers, there is a niggling resentment among those in their early 20s towards baby boomers, whom they see as irresponsible with their money given the length of time they've had to save and prepare for retirement. Echoing this thought is the observation in this study across generations that there really are few positive role models, either presented in the media or in respondents' lives, of people who genuinely have a good lifestyle in retirement due to superannuation. Much of the information that they see and record is what they think is far out of their reach. It's things you do when you win Tats Lotto, in a yacht, in a luxury house, etc. How much is enough? That magic number that no one can work out. Predictions and forecasts of what amount of money will be needed for retirement cause mass confusion and alarm with individual lifestyles and values closely linked to this. Trying to understand and decide what is this magic number that we will need to live, to keep our current lifestyle, or just to survive. What may seem like a little money to one person is the equivalent of a fortune to another. And I'll just cite you this one comment. I was having this conversation with this dude the other night, and he earns 90 to 100 grand as a military police or something. And he said, you know, I worry about not having enough. He's in his 40s and he's got 750 grand. I said, are you serious? I can't imagine ever having that much. Fed by regular disclosure in the media of a fictional monetary amount required to actually raise your children and this cost of bringing up children, parents rejoice in voicing just how expensive their kids are and that these days they just won't leave home. Yet underlying this kids are expensive comment really sits a justification for many as to their current levels of debt. Participants in this study prioritise their children with their mortgage as their principal financial priority, even if their children were of adult age. Parents admitted that they would do whatever it takes to get their children successfully into adulthood and that their retirement saving is a second goal. Many seeing investing in their children as also investing in their future. There is also some resentment around super legislation that was perceived to be benefiting members of society above the majority. Recent changes to before tax contributions in particular, allowing much more to be moved into super, is seen as rewarding those who already have the money, the wealthy. It's only benefiting people that can afford to put a chunk of their income into super. You have to have a fairly high disposable income to do that. The contingency plan. Australians rely on a range of options when they discuss how will they actually manage. As I said before, many don't feel they'll have enough to retire on in their current super fund. So what will they do? How will they manage their income and, for many, their lifestyle? Major assets of a family home or small business are seen as fallback positions, or she'll be right is often used when they realise they're up against the wall with minimal and insufficient time to actually pull it all together. Across generations, as I said earlier, the real focus is on housing. Ownership of a house is seen as a critical insurance necessary when reaching the end of your working life. As a consequence, some Australians see their house as a cashable asset to fund retirement if they really get stuck. However, others who find themselves in retirement without enough money and have toyed with the idea of actually downsizing find that the reality is quite different when they're going looking for a house of equivalent quality in the same area and realise they don't actually want to leave their community and have to re-establish in a community elsewhere. Well, the concept of reverse mortgages is far from mainstream in general discussion. When surveyed, 10% said they would probably have to live off the equity in their house when they retire. The thought of the government of any political persuasion letting citizens down by not providing for their retirement through a pension is conceptually beyond many participants in this study, especially those in the 35 plus age group. They, the government, are not going to let us starve. For many others, the reality is in the economic argument that shows the ratio of pension-aged Australians to working-age Australians, with the necessarily prohibit universal welfare for the aged. These are more likely to be those in the younger age groups having that view. Divided over the future of a pension. 42% of those reported that they think a pension will always be available, while the other half hold the belief that it actually won't. We're divided as to whether or not there will be a pension when they retire. Baby boomers have little desire to join the bowling club anymore, as the value of their work status provides for them on a personal level, but also the prospect of a continuous income stream is very compelling given their existing lifestyle and the amount they actually have in their superannuation fund. Furthermore, through the abolition of compulsory retirement age, the inclination to work into older age is compelling. For many, in light of the prospect of having to live a reduced lifestyle due to insufficient funds. The I'll keep working plan. 20% of Australians can't imagine the day they actually stop work altogether. Retirement, potentially a fading notion. Underpinned by perception that the retirement age will need to be increased as we are living longer. Over half of those surveyed agreed that this will happen and it will continue to happen. There is an air of resignation for those in their 50s or 60s who now find themselves in circumstances of not having enough for retirement, or who are now facing a realisation that their age means they should be thinking about retirement and the related financial decisions around that. This is especially apparent for those who are renting and have not owned their home or still have a large mortgage to pay. Despite their seemingly difficult road ahead, there is an overwhelming sense of acceptance that based on their life experiences and that they have survived to date, that they'll survive in retirement. Given the misconceptions and the myths and the uncertainty of future government policy, as with so many social, legal and political issues that face Australians' daily lives, often they're only addressed if someone assists them in doing so. And they are the challenges that lie ahead. Over the course of the next couple of months, we'll be working with AIST and their members to look at actually what you can do with these results to help re-engage and dispel some of these myths. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. You finished early. You caught me off guard there. Okay, so we've got plenty of time for some questions with Nicole. So if you can just raise your hand. It's difficult to see here, but I'll try to find you. Yell out if otherwise.
And please don't ask me how much do I need to retire on.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes, we've got a gentleman up here.
Yes, sorry, I can't see a thing. You might have to direct
I
questions,
think I can
Nicole.
see that way, but I cannot see that way.
Okay.
Yes, Nicole, my question goes to, did you ask any questions about communication or education from the superannuation fund? How valid they thought it was, how realistic it was, how helpful it was?
Yes, we did, and that was part of them responding to us around the language and the jargon. In the qualitative research, what was really interesting is that when they talked about the communication, for a lot of them, they just felt it didn't resonate for them because it just was nowhere near where they were at. So for younger ones, it was communicating so far into the distance, a life they could not foresee. And for those who were actually, older, so the 40-plus groups, often it's communicating things that they can't even imagine. So they talked about that's only if you win Tatslotto or only if you get lucky with the lump sum. So the other thing here is around their perceptions of retirement, which we haven't had time to touch on this morning. But for many, their perception of retirement isn't going off and buying a yacht or going off and doing those sort of things. It's doing what they currently do, but having the occasional holiday. You know, one lady described, you know, just having time to be able to listen to the birds. So a lot of the communication is around this sort of lifestyle that they don't have and that they can't perceive having. So there's quite a disconnect from that sense. The other thing with communication that was commented in the qualitative is that it doesn't change. So, you know, that it always looks the same as it's coming through.
Okay. Andrew.
Thanks, Nicole. Andrew Barr, AIST. Following on from that question, if they don't want the luxury yachts and the luxury homes, they really want some simpler stuff, is that because they think that that stuff's unattainable? The luxury yacht and stuff is really unattainable? Or is that genuinely what they want?
Yeah, catch-22 for them, isn't it? Who wouldn't want it, I guess? But it's unobtainable from them also because, remember, they don't think, compared to their house, that they have much money in super anyway. You know, they see the value of their house as substantially more often than what they actually have in their superannuation fund. And it's about hitting that medium in terms of a desire to retire and not work, or you know, having lifestyle choices, which may just be sitting down and having a coffee when you choose at your local cafe, as opposed to sailing a yacht around the Whitsundays.
Nicole, I wonder if you could talk about one of the interesting things that you told me about the study was how people don't really understand the concepts of savings anymore, but they understand the concept of debt, and maybe we should talk about superannuation in a different way.
Yep. It's what we were referring to as researchers as the backward way to think about it. So, you know, the idea that you keep saving and you get to this potential point. A number of the respondents were saying, well, if they could just tell me to get $500,000, this is what I need to do over the next number of years, or this is how much I need to contribute. Part of that is also saying we will give you $700,000 or $500,000, whatever the amount is, but to pay it off, this is what you actually need to pay off. So very strong paying off mentality as opposed to a saving mentality. And the idea for them that they could pay something off and know that then they could actually access that lump sum, assuming there were some certainties around the lump sum rules, was actually quite compelling to them. It also removes for them the uncertainty around whether it's going up, down, or what's happening with it. You know, and that is a real concern because they see it on the nightly news.
Some more questions? Yes, up here in the middle.
I wonder, out of the research, were there actually any surprises to you in terms of the responses? Were you surprised by what people said, or was it kind of what you expected and it was all fairly intuitive?
No, I was actually surprised by how disengaged people were. And I would say the major surprise from the research team, because before we start the study we actually whiteboard and list all the things that we assume we'll find, and we double check ourselves as we go through. And it was just how disconnected people were about not even discussing it as their money, as something that is theirs. And I thought that was particularly surprising. A lot of that is linked around that, you know, it's the employer does it, and I can't access it, and I can't control it.
There's a question up the top here.
Lindsay Oxlade, Statewide Superannuation Trust. Nicole, thanks very much for that, but as I sat here listening to what you were saying, I was surprised, and the questions came into my mind. What was the demographic you're looking at? What was the geography? Where were the people? Was your sample all in Sydney? Was it all under 21? What was the age? These sorts of things. Because some of the things you're mentioning, they're about the sort of things we heard 10 years ago. From the younger people particularly, and the research that I've seen has the younger people very attuned to the issue of superannuation. Yes, they see it as a second order saving, but they see it as necessary, particularly as they go through their life cycle and get to the stage of family and children, and suddenly begin to see that they're not completely, or that they're actually mortals and they will eventually need it.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the responses are interesting. Can't be bothered reading it, yet we in the super industry have spent a lot of time in making it very easy to understand things. You get a statement that says, this is what your account is, this is what it earned. And people do pick up that, and the research that we've seen suggests that that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a sort of a disconnect between what you're saying and what we've found in the past. I'm just interested, are you going to be able to publish this so we can have a look at the statistics, the quantitative stuff, the qualitative stuff? What questions you asked in the focus groups, how you phrased them, that sort of thing?
Yes, let me answer your first question. You obviously came in late when I outlined what the study contained. We did 14 focus groups and 18 depth interviews and a quantitative study of 2,000 people from the ages of 18 to mid-70s, and they were in all major capital cities, and it was across Middle Australia. And yes, the results are published, and Fiona has the reports and she'll be handing those to members in due course. I think it's interesting that if the results differ to yours, and I'd really like to have a look at yours if you have them, and let's see where they differ and what some insights are that we could actually look across both of them.
I just wanted to add to that I think one of the surprising things for us, given your comment, was that these are the kind of things that we heard about 10 years ago, and we had really expected that from everything else that we hear about in the industry that things had moved on, and we're quite surprised to see that even though that's our own perceptions, that it's not necessarily the reality, that we're still in the same boat that we were 10 years ago. Maybe we've moved slightly, but certainly not enough. Are there any other questions? Yes, up the top up here.
Wally Troll here, Bus Q. Has there been a perceivable difference in people who are making a personal contribution? I mean, compulsory. For example, our fund, a lot of our members are on, the employer pays 12, they pay 3. Is that different from the 9s? And also, is there a different perception in members as their balance increases? So, for example, between someone that's on 50,000 in the balance and someone in 300,000?
Good questions. We haven't had a chance to explore it at that level. But yeah, you would expect that somewhere that contribution amount would impact on their perceptions. As I said, this study covered all types of funds, so retail, industry and government, and that would also be a key variable.
Okay, yes, up here.
Hi Nicole, Angela Emsley from HESTA. We all in the superannuation industry in Australia think we've got the best system in the world, and I'm wondering from the comments that you've said whether there's a need for a campaign to build confidence in super itself, and in particular the system that we have, and also what your thoughts are on the marketing campaigns that have already been sort of had across the industry. It seems to me that they're fed into this disconnect with super rather than actually built confidence in super.
Well, I won't comment on everyone's individual campaigns. Happy to do that separately. But I would say that people do need some certainty. And I think the first thing is certainty around government policy, around what will actually happen to the amount. The communications recently about if you're with an industry fund, you get the tick, because there was quite a bit of confusion around even what funds were what. And rather than ask people whether they're in an industry fund or a retail fund or a government fund, we actually just asked them to tell us their fund and back-coded it, because we found in the qualitative study that they were quite confused about how they describe it. In relation to campaigns, I think the one that did come up quite a bit was showing where there were the two guys on the escalator, so they're comparing industry versus non, and it was only commented when people were saying, well, I'm probably the one going down or I'm the loser. And for them it was really representing that they're disengaged, they're really not sure what's going on. So in terms of commenting on campaigns, that was used when people were trying to communicate to their mates and their neighbours, etc., where they felt they were. And often they talked about themselves in terms of being that person on the lift going down.
Over here, yes.
Richard Fuller from HESTA Superannuation. Nicole, you spoke of disengagement and the feeling that it's not their money, but there's also quite a lot of fear and anxiety as well. How do you reconcile the two, and what lessons can you draw from that?
I think reconciling it is actually for them to feel that it is their money, is to, even one of the things about getting statements is to say, we have made sure that your employer has paid you this money for you, using much more of the you language. And just removing any barriers and dispelling, if you can, any of the myths, because a lot of the uncertainty is used as a justification for not getting involved. So, oh, well, the taxes will probably change and I'll lose half of it anyway, so I might as well do something else. Or the lump sum rules, who knows what's going to happen then? So it sort of distracts them as having a focus on it. So I really think a longer term sense of security about what are the rules around superannuation would do a huge job to actually help try and firm that up and build engagement. I don't think it's just about the marketing campaigns of the actual member funds.
Further questions? Yes, up here. Annie, up here.
Howard Rosario from West Scheme. I'm a bit troubled by the whole presentation today, so I hope I can articulate my question in a way that makes sense to you. It seems to me that if you go back to what the whole purpose of superannuation was when the SGC was introduced, is that it was going to give people a better lifestyle in retirement. And the assumption was that the fundamental platform was going to be the age pension. And I'm one of the people in this room who've been coming to these conferences and other superannuation conferences now going back into the early 90s. And I've never heard a Minister of the Crown ever suggest that they were going to withdraw the age pension. And it seems to me that we're going out to people and talking to people about whether they can engage in and control these issues that have never been within their control. And I don't know whether we're just, in a sense, making them more disempowered when the facts are that, for instance, the age pension is not going to be removed. I remember going to a conference in 2001, in September of 2001, and you can imagine the mood of that conference was pretty bad. We'd had September the 11th, ANZET had collapsed, most people couldn't get to the conference, and Simon O'Regan of Mercer's put up some information at that conference that showed that whether you had $200,000 saved for your retirement or $400,000, I hope I'm recalling the figures correctly, it made no significant difference to the amount of retirement income you had. You still had $40,000 a year. Now, it just seems to me that there are a lot of safeguards in the system. The system, when I came into it, had virtually nothing in it. Today it's got more than $1 trillion, give or take a few $100 billion depending upon the markets, but there's a lot more money in this system. Sure, rich people in the main have got a lot more money in the system, but so do people who are not well off. And it just seems to me that going to people who are disengaged, telling them through the process that they are disengaged and not controlling this future, creates an even greater anxiety when everything is in the direction of giving them assurance at the time when they come to need that better lifestyle in retirement.
I'm not suggesting you go and tell them about uncertainties. What I'm talking about here is that is a framework in which they think, as I said at the start, this is how they're thinking, whether it's true, false or indifferent. If they're feeling uncertainty around some of these broader areas, around being secure or whether or not their fund will go broke, that is their reality. Whether it's true or not, that is the reality in which your fund will need to operate and superannuation will need to operate in.
Any further questions? Yes, sorry, over here. Ian.
Ian Robertson, local government super. I've got some sympathy with the bloke up the back here, because I think when you pitched this research to the AIST board, my first question was, where did you find all these stupid people? Because it doesn't coincide at all with the research our fund's done either, but I'm not having a go at the research. I'm sure those attitudes are out there. Isn't it true, though, that really what all this shows is how wise the government was to have 9% compulsory? And in a way, if it's compulsory and if people who know about what's best for retirement incomes can actually bump that up to a more acceptable figure, it really doesn't matter how disengaged people are or how ignorant they are. In the end, there'll be something nice waiting for them.
Well, that's a very nice notion. The only thing with that, though, is that if we're looking for them to actually potentially contribute more to superannuation, then they should be more, aware of it and more engaged. And the fact that they don't feel it's their money also has other ramifications, as in, salary packaging. Oh, well, what's that 9%, etc. So no, look, it's a nice thing that let's take, your view, quite paternalistic. Let's take care of them anyway, and at the end of the day, give them this. And for many, that's what needs to be done. But there are a lot of still myths and concerns around what may or may not happen. And the other thing is that it worries them, that they're worried they don't have enough. And that for many of them, they're worried they don't have enough time to actually build that fund up for someone nice to actually hand it to them at the end.
I think, though, when you read through all of the research, that to me what it did say was, just following on from what Ian said, that we do need a compulsory system.
Yep.
That Australians aren't savers. We're not a country of savers. A lot of people aren't engaged in their super. They are anxious about it. I still think that they would welcome... They still think the superannuation industry should be there, that there should be compulsory super, that it's going to help them. So the way for that is to increase our compulsory super and have a long-term plan for people to help them. And that it needs bipartisan support, because definitely a lot of the research was uncertainty, not from what the superannuation industry was doing, but what the government was doing, that they were constantly changing the rules. How are they going to plan for retirement if the government kept changing it? How did they know that if they started down this track that the government wasn't going to come along and change the rules yet again? So kind of like, well, why bother?
Yeah, and the rule change, in particular the tax rule, is around, well, I've only got X amount in there. It could be that the government changes the tax rule and I've only got a much smaller amount left. So I think certainty can be bedded down through government policy.
Okay, any last questions? Sorry.
Michael O'Sullivan, Care Super, over here.
Oh, you're just a light.
Just reading the quotes that you had on the board, it seemed as if older workers, by the language anyway, because they didn't say everything was like something, but they seem to understand that they probably will have an inadequate saving, and that's because they didn't have super till award super came into being and then the SGC. So they're probably right about that, and there's not much we can do except encourage them to make more contributions. What's more disturbing is the people who say everything's like something didn't seem to have a very much understanding at all, and as you say, they appear disengaged by your quotes. Who would they trust to tell them about super? You think they don't trust the government and they don't seem to pay attention to our educational efforts. Do you have a view about which voice would they listen to? Because it's very important to us that we have credibility with them, but you seem to be saying that we don't.
Well, I'm not saying you don't have credibility. I think the thing around the government isn't distrusting of the government, it's just complete uncertainty and not trusting what rules may apply when they actually retire. There are people, a number of them in the qualitative research, talked about seeking some financial advice. Much of that, though, was around their mortgage as opposed to their money matters. And, there could be an opportunity there potentially for the broader industry super funds to actually take that on.
Okay, there's another question up here.
Colin Westman from Rice Warner. Nicole, it's been a long time since I studied statistics, but those numbers that you quoted, are those numbers large enough to say that your conclusions are truly representative of the Australian population?
Well, they're representative where they are of Middle Australia. So we exclude people who are extremely wealthy and people who are extremely poor. So yes, our conclusions are, yep.
But it's more to just the sample size, like 2,000, I think you said, you sent out forms.
We surveyed 2,000 and yes, they are representative with plus or minus 4.4% depending on what the actual result is. When you actually read the report, you'll see where they are actually sitting and where the significance is actually wrapped around the statistic. So that will help you clarify, hopefully, when you get a copy of your report.
Okay, well, if there's no further questions, we might leave it there. It's difficult to look at ourselves and see how other people might see us. And I know that some people in here have differing views, but we will send you out all of the research. So I'd like to thank Nicole for her time today and for her insights.
Thank you.